Marcus Chen adjusted his worn leather jacket as he stepped off the transport shuttle onto the polished metal floors of the Galactic Academy. The massive space station rotated slowly, creating artificial gravity that felt almost like Earth's pull. Students from dozens of different species hurried past him in the corridors, their chittering, growling, and melodic voices creating a symphony of alien communication. He had been teaching human history at various frontier colonies for the past 15 years, but this assignment was different. The Galactic Academy was the most prestigious educational institution in known space, where the children of diplomats, military leaders, and wealthy merchants from hundreds of worlds came to learn. When they offered him a position teaching primitive warfare and historical combat systems, he couldn't refuse, even though he suspected there was more to the job than they were telling him. The corridors were lined with displays showcasing the military achievements of different species. Marcus paused at one showing the crystalline energy weapons of the Zephyrians, their translucent forms barely visible as they demonstrated combat techniques that looked more like an elegant dance. Another display featured the Cronin battlesuits, massive exoskeletons that turned their already imposing reptilian forms into walking tanks. "Professor Chen?" a voice called out behind him. Marcus turned to see a tall, blue-skinned Altarian approaching. Her silver robes marked her as faculty, and the 3 parallel scars on her forehead indicated she held a high academic rank. "I am Dean Veltar. Welcome to the Academy." "Thank you for having me," Marcus replied, extending his hand in the human gesture of greeting. The Dean's 4-fingered hand was surprisingly warm as she grasped his. "Your reputation precedes you. We've heard remarkable things about your unconventional teaching methods. The board was particularly impressed by your work on the colony of New Geneva, where you helped students understand ancient Earth military tactics by having them recreate historical battles." Marcus nodded. History comes alive when students can experience it firsthand. Reading about the Battle of Thermopylae is one thing, but understanding the tactical decisions and environmental factors requires a more hands-on approach. "Precisely why we need you here." Dean Veltar began walking, and Marcus fell into step beside her. "Our students excel in modern warfare theory and advanced weaponry, but they lack understanding of fundamental combat principles. They can operate a plasma cannon or pilot a fighter craft, but they've never learned to think like a warrior." They passed through a security checkpoint where guards in ceremonial armor nodded respectfully to the dean. The weapons training section was clearly a restricted area. Marcus noticed the guards were armed with energy weapons he didn't recognize, sleek devices that hummed with barely contained power. "The Confederation military has requested that we improve our tactical education program," the dean continued. "Too many of our graduates enter service with book knowledge but no instinct for battle. They understand weapon specifications and formation movements, but when faced with unexpected situations, they freeze." They entered a vast training hall where students were practicing with various weapons. Marcus watched a group of insectoid Thraxians wielding energy spears with 4 arms each, moving in perfect synchronization. Nearby, hulking ursine creatures practiced with massive warhammers that could probably punch through a starship hull. "This is impressive," Marcus said, genuinely amazed by the display of skill and technology. "But limited," the dean replied. "Watch what happens when we introduce variables." She activated a wall console, and suddenly, the training area's gravity shifted, creating pockets of low and high gravity throughout the space. The perfectly coordinated Thraxians immediately became disoriented, their synchronized movements turning chaotic. The Ursine warriors struggled to adjust their swing timing as their massive hammers became unpredictably light or heavy. "They've trained extensively with their preferred weapons in ideal conditions," Dean Veltar explained. "But warfare is never ideal. We need someone who can teach them to think creatively, to adapt, to use whatever tools are available." Marcus understood now why they'd brought him here. Human military history was filled with examples of improvisation and adaptation. From the Underground Railroad's hidden networks to the French Resistance's guerrilla tactics, humans had always found ways to fight with limited resources. "What kind of timeline are we looking at?" he asked. "The semester begins in 3 standard days. Your first class will have 40 students from 12 different species. They've all scored in the top percentile for weapons proficiency with their species' traditional armaments." They continued the tour, passing classrooms where students learned about battlefield communications, strategic planning, and weapons maintenance. Everything was high-tech and efficient, but Marcus noticed something missing. There was no chaos, no unpredictability, no messy reality of actual combat. "Dean, if I may ask, What's the Academy's policy on unconventional teaching methods? The dean's large black eyes regarded him carefully. The board has given you considerable latitude. They understand that human teaching methods are unique. As long as your students learn and no permanent harm comes to them, you have our full support. That evening, Marcus sat in his assigned quarters, a surprisingly spacious apartment overlooking the Academy's central plaza. Through the transparent aluminum windows, he could see students from dozens of species socializing, studying, and engaging in recreational activities. The diversity was stunning. Crystalline beings that seemed to glow with inner light conversed with metallic humanoids whose faces showed emotion through shifting patterns of lights. He pulled up the files on his incoming students. Each profile included detailed information about their species' military traditions, preferred weapons, and combat psychology. The Zephyrians favored long-range energy weapons and relied heavily on their natural ability to become nearly invisible. The Cronins were shock troops who preferred close combat with heavy armor and devastating melee weapons. The Altarians used sophisticated energy shields and preferred tactical superiority through superior positioning and intelligence gathering. What struck Marcus was how specialized each species had become. They were incredibly effective within their preferred combat styles, but rigid in their thinking. The profile showed student after student who excelled in simulations but struggled in real-world exercises where variables couldn't be controlled. He made notes as he read. Zephyrian stealth capabilities excellent, but rely too heavily on technological camouflage. No understanding of natural concealment or misdirection. Cronin physical strength tremendous, but tactical flexibility limited by cultural emphasis on frontal assault. As he reviewed the curriculum requirements, Marcus realized the Academy wanted him to teach a course called Adaptive Combat Principles. The description was vague, mentioning only that students should learn to utilize available resources in combat situations when preferred weapons or tactics are unavailable. A smile crossed his face. They wanted him to teach human-style improvisation to alien students who had grown up with advanced technology and specialized training. It was going to be challenging, but also exciting. The next morning, Marcus toured the weapons training facility more thoroughly. Room after room contained advanced armaments, energy weapons that could punch through starship armor, projectile weapons that fired self-guided ammunition, melee weapons made from materials that could cut through virtually anything. He stopped at one display case containing what appeared to be a simple knife, except the blade was made from some kind of energy field contained within a magnetic shell. The information placard explained it could cut through any known material by disrupting molecular bonds. Impressive technology, he murmured, but something about it bothered him. The weapons were so advanced, so specialized, that they removed the user from the fundamental principles of combat. A warrior using an energy blade that could cut anything didn't need to understand leverage, edge geometry, or the dozens of other factors that made a traditional blade effective. Marcus requested access to the Academy's historical databases and spent the next 2 days researching the military history of the various species his students represented. What he found was fascinating. Each species had developed incredibly sophisticated warfare traditions, but they had all followed similar paths, starting with simple tools and weapons, then advancing to more and more complex technology. The Cronins had once been clever hunters who used primitive spears and coordinated pack tactics to bring down massive prey on their homeworld. Now they relied on powered armor and energy weapons, having forgotten the cunning that had made their ancestors successful. The Zephyrians had evolved from ambush predators who used their natural camouflage and patient observation to hunt. Their ancestors had been masters of reading environmental cues and exploiting their prey's behavioral patterns. Modern Zephyrians used technological invisibility fields and relied on sensor data rather than their own observation skills. The pattern was clear across all the species. Technological advancement had made them more powerful but less adaptable. They had gained capability but lost creativity. On the final day before classes began, Marcus made a special request to Dean Veltar. "I'd like to conduct my first class in a standard classroom rather than the weapons training facility." The dean's expression showed surprise. "Professor Chen, the curriculum specifies that adaptive combat principles must be taught in a practical environment with access to training weapons. I understand, but I want to establish some foundational concepts first." "Trust me, Dean. This approach will be more effective." After some discussion, she agreed, though Marcus could tell she had reservations. He spent the evening preparing his lesson plan, grinning as he imagined his students' reactions to what he had planned. The classroom was typical of academic institutions throughout the galaxy: modular furniture that could be reconfigured for different species, multiple display screens, and environmental controls to accommodate various atmospheric requirements. 40 students filed in, representing 12 different species, each one probably capable of devastating combat with their preferred weapons and tactics. Marcus stood at the front of the room, wearing simple clothing instead of any kind of uniform or academic robes. He had deliberately chosen to appear as ordinary and non-threatening as possible. "Welcome to Adaptive Combat Principles," he began, speaking in Standard Galactic while the room's translation system provided real-time interpretation for species that couldn't process those particular frequencies. "I'm Professor Chen, and I'll be your instructor." A Cronin student, easily 8 feet tall even while sitting, raised a massive clawed hand. "Professor, shouldn't we be in the weapons training facility? We were told this course would involve practical combat exercises." "We will get to practical exercises," Marcus replied. "But first, I want to understand what you already know. Who can tell me the most important factor in winning a battle?" Hands, claws, tentacles, and other appendages shot up around the room. A Zephyrian student, barely visible even without active camouflage, spoke first. "Superior firepower, Professor. The force that can deliver the most destructive energy to the target area will achieve victory." "Interesting perspective. Anyone else?" A metallic synth student's face display flickered with patterns indicating analytical thought. "Tactical positioning. The force that controls advantageous terrain and supply lines will outlast and outmaneuver their opponents." More students offered answers. "Speed and mobility. Advanced intelligence gathering. Numerical superiority. Better armor and defensive systems." Marcus nodded as each student spoke. All excellent answers, and all correct under specific circumstances. But let me ask a different question. What happens when you don't have superior firepower? When your position is compromised? When your advanced weapons malfunction or run out of power? The room fell silent. These students had trained extensively in ideal conditions with preferred equipment. The concept of fighting without advantages was foreign to them. Human military history is filled with examples of forces achieving victory despite being outgunned, outnumbered, and out-equipped. We call this asymmetric warfare, and it's based on a simple principle: creativity and adaptation can overcome technological or numerical advantages. Marcus began to pace, and several students instinctively tracked his movement. Good, they had combat awareness even in a classroom setting. "For our first exercise, I want to explore this concept. I'm going to give you a scenario, and I want you to develop tactical solutions." He activated the room's holographic display system, creating a three-dimensional battlefield scenario. A small force was trapped in a valley, surrounded by superior numbers with better weapons and air support. The trapped force has limited ammunition, no heavy weapons, and no possibility of reinforcement or retreat. How do they achieve victory? The students immediately began analyzing the scenario with their species' traditional approaches. The Zephyrians discussed stealth infiltration to assassinate enemy leaders. The Cronins proposed a massive frontal assault to break through the weakest point in the encirclement. The Altarians suggested using energy shields to create a defensive position while calling for orbital bombardment support. Marcus listened to their discussions, noting how each species defaulted to their cultural strengths. After 20 minutes, he called for their attention. "Excellent analysis, but I notice you're all approaching this from your species' traditional perspectives. What if I told you this scenario is based on a real historical battle from Earth?" He modified the holographic display, showing a mountainous region with forests and rocky terrain. "This is the Battle of Thermopylae, fought over 2,000 years ago. 300 Spartan warriors, along with allied forces totaling perhaps 7,000, faced a Persian army estimated at over 100,000. The numbers caused a stir among the students. Such overwhelming odds would be considered hopeless by any modern military analysis. The Greeks had bronze weapons and leather armor. The Persians had superior numbers, better equipment, and complete naval superiority. Yet the Greeks held them off for 3 days and inflicted massive casualties. Athraxian students' four eyes fixed on the display. What weapons did they use? Some kind of primitive energy system? Marcus chuckled. Spears, shields, and swords made of bronze and iron. No energy weapons, no powered armor, no advanced technology of any kind. They won through tactical intelligence, superior positioning, and, most importantly, creative use of their environment. He zoomed in on the narrow pass where the battle had taken place. The Greeks chose a position where the Persians couldn't use their numerical advantage. They forced a much larger army to attack through a space so narrow that only a few soldiers could fight at once. The concept was simple, but Marcus could see it was revolutionary to his students. They had been trained to think in terms of technological solutions to tactical problems. But, Professor, the synth students said, surely the Persians had ranged weapons? Why didn't they simply bombard the Greek position from a distance? They did. The Greeks created a shield wall formation that provided protection against arrows while still allowing them to fight effectively. When the Persians sent in their elite troops, the Immortals, the Greeks used the terrain to their advantage and superior training to defeat forces that should have been overwhelming. Marcus could see the students beginning to understand. Superior technology and numbers meant nothing if they couldn't be effectively deployed. Your assignment for our next class is this: I want each of you to research a historical battle from your own species' past where the victorious force overcame significant disadvantages through creative tactics or adaptation. Focus on conflicts that occurred before your species developed advanced technology. As the students filed out, Marcus overheard fragments of excited conversations. They were intrigued by concepts they had never considered, and he could tell they were going to approach their research with enthusiasm. The next morning, Dean Veltar stopped by his office. Professor Chen, I've been hearing interesting things about your first class. Several students have spent the night in the historical archives, researching their species' pre-technological warfare. That's exactly what I was hoping for. They need to understand that the principles of warfare existed long before energy weapons and powered armor. The weapons training instructors are curious about your methods. They're wondering when you'll begin practical exercises. Marcus smiled. Sooner than they think. But first, I need to break down some assumptions my students have about what constitutes a weapon. The dean's expression showed polite confusion, but she didn't press for details. For the second class, Marcus had arranged for the classroom to be stripped of its usual high-tech equipment. Standard desks and chairs were arranged in rows, with basic writing materials available for students who needed them. When the students arrived, several looked around in confusion. No holographic displays today, Marcus announced. We're going back to basics. I want to hear about the historical battles you researched. The presentations were fascinating. A Zephyrian student described an ancient conflict where her ancestors had used fog and misdirection to defeat a much larger enemy force, long before they had developed invisibility technology. A Cronan student, clearly struggling with concepts his culture rarely discussed, described how his ancestors had once used pack hunting tactics and crude tools to drive massive predators away from their territory. Each presentation revealed the same pattern. Before advanced technology, these species had been creative, adaptive, and resourceful. They had understood that warfare was about problem-solving as much as fighting. Outstanding research, Marcus said after the last presentation. Now I want to try an exercise. Everyone stand up and move to the center of the room. The students complied, though several looked uncertain about what was happening. I want you to imagine that you're stranded on a primitive world with no access to your usual weapons or technology. You have only what's available in this classroom. A hostile force is approaching, and you need to defend yourselves. What do you use? The students looked around the sparse classroom. Basic furniture, writing materials, some decorative plants, and little else. Professor, the Thraxian student said, there are no weapons here. Are you sure? Look again. Marcus walked over to one of the desks and lifted a chair. This has 4 legs that could be used as clubs if removed. The back could serve as a shield. The metal supports could be fashioned into spear points. He moved to the writing materials. These styluses could be projectiles or stabbing weapons. The data tablets could be thrown to create distraction or, if broken, provide sharp edges. Slowly, the students began to see the classroom differently. The Altarian student pointed to the decorative plants. Those containers could be used as helmets or small shields. The plants themselves might provide camouflage. The room's environmental controls, added the synth student, could be modified to create atmospheric distraction, changing temperature or air composition to disorient attackers. Marcus nodded approvingly.
You're beginning to understand. Everything around you is a potential tool or weapon. The key is learning to see beyond the obvious function of objects. He could see the excitement growing among his students as they began identifying more possibilities. The desk surfaces could be removed to create barriers. The room's lighting could be controlled to create advantages for defenders who knew the layout. This is the foundation of adaptive combat principles, Marcus said. When you're fighting in space with energy weapons and powered armor, you have incredible advantages. But what happens when your weapons fail? When you're cut off from supplies? When you find yourself in an environment where your technology doesn't work? A Zephyrian student, now more visible as she became excited, raised her hand. Professor, are you suggesting we should abandon our advanced weapons? Not at all. I'm suggesting you should understand the principles behind effective combat so that you can adapt when your preferred tools aren't available. Your energy weapons are incredibly powerful, but they're based on the same fundamental concepts as ancient projectile weapons: accuracy, range, and target acquisition. Marcus spent the rest of the class discussing how modern military principles had evolved from ancient concepts. Shields and energy barriers served the same purpose. Tactical formations were the same whether you were using spears or plasma rifles. The ability to read terrain and exploit environmental advantages was timeless. As the class ended, Marcus made an announcement that caused a stir among the students. For our next class, we're moving to the weapons training facility. But here's the catch: you won't be using any of the weapons in the facility's arsenal. Instead, I'll be teaching you to create effective weapons from basic materials. The excited chatter that followed him out of the classroom told Marcus that his unconventional approach was working. His students were beginning to think like warriors instead of just weapons operators. That evening, Marcus received a message from the Academy's weapons training coordinator, a gruff Ursine named Commander Throck. Professor Chen, I hear you're planning to bring students into my facility without using any actual weapons. Are you sure you know what you're doing? Marcus smiled as he composed his reply. Commander, I guarantee your facility will never be the same after my students visit it. They're about to learn that the most dangerous weapon in any arsenal is a creative mind. Commander Throck stood in the center of the weapons training facility, his massive Ursine frame casting long shadows under the bright overhead lights. Around him, display cases held some of the most advanced weapons in known space: plasma rifles that could melt through starship hulls, energy blades that could cut molecular bonds, and projectile weapons that fired self-guiding ammunition at near light speed. Marcus Chen walked into the facility with his 40 students trailing behind him, their various forms creating a colorful parade of alien species. The contrast was striking: advanced alien technology surrounding a simple human teacher and his eager students. Welcome to the heart of the Academy's weapons program, Commander Throck rumbled, his voice carrying the authority of decades of military experience. Every weapon in this facility represents the pinnacle of its species' military development. Marcus nodded respectfully to the commander, then turned to address his students. Today, we're going to put theory into practice. Commander Throck has graciously agreed to let us use his facility for a demonstration. What kind of demonstration? Asked the Cronin student, his reptilian features showing curiosity mixed with anticipation. I'm going to show you how to create an effective weapon system using only materials available in this room, excluding the actual weapons in the display cases. Commander Throck's expression showed skepticism. Professor Chen, with respect, this facility is designed for advanced weapons training. We have energy sources, targeting systems, and materials that represent thousands of years of technological development. What could you possibly create that would be more effective than what we already have? Marcus smiled. Commander, effectiveness isn't always about raw power. Sometimes it's about understanding fundamental principles and applying them creatively. He began walking around the training area, examining the room with the same intensity his students had learned to recognize. The facility was impressive: a vast space with adjustable gravity fields, holographic targeting systems, and modular training environments that could simulate everything from zero-gravity combat to urban warfare. What do you see when you look around this room? Marcus asked his students. The Zephyrian student, now completely invisible except for the slight shimmer that revealed her movement, spoke first. Advanced targeting systems, energy distribution networks, environmental controls. All correct. But let's think more fundamentally. What are the basic components of any effective ranged weapon? The synth student's facial display flickered with analysis patterns.
a projectile delivery system, a power source to propel the projectile, and a targeting mechanism to ensure accuracy.
Excellent. And what are the basic principles of effective projectiles? Mass, velocity, and accuracy, replied the Altarian student. The ability to transfer kinetic energy to a target at range. Marcus nodded approvingly.
Now, with those principles in mind, let's see what's available. He walked over to one of the training stations where maintenance tools were stored. The facility used various materials for equipment repair and modification, metal rods for structural support, synthetic cables for power distribution, and advanced polymers for equipment housings.
Commander, may I borrow some of these materials for my demonstration? Commander Throck gestured broadly. Feel free, Professor. I'm curious to see what you have in mind.
Marcus selected a length of flexible metal rod, approximately 2 meters long and designed for supporting holographic display equipment. The material was strong but flexible, with excellent tensile strength. This will serve as our primary component, he said, holding up the rod for his students to see. Next, he gathered several lengths of synthetic cable, each about as thick as his finger. The cables were used for data transmission throughout the facility and were incredibly strong despite their light weight. These will provide the energy storage and release mechanism. From the polymer materials, he selected several pieces that could be shaped and modified.
The polymers were designed to be easily molded for custom equipment housings. And these will allow us to create the necessary structural components.
Commander Throck watched with growing interest as Marcus began assembling his materials.
Professor, what exactly are you building? A bow, Marcus replied simply.
The response caused a stir among both students and facility staff. Several alien concepts didn't translate directly, but the room's systems quickly provided definitions and historical context. A primitive projectile weapon used by pre-technological civilizations, the Thraxian student said, accessing his species' historical databases. Based on stored mechanical energy and projectile physics.
Exactly.
One of humanity's oldest and most effective weapons, used successfully for thousands of years before we developed energy weapons. Marcus began shaping the flexible metal rod, carefully bending it into a curved form. The material's properties allowed it to hold its shape while retaining flexibility. As he worked, he explained the principles involved. The bow stores energy through mechanical tension. When the string is drawn back, potential energy builds up in the bent limbs. Releasing the string converts that potential energy into kinetic energy, propelling the projectile. The Cronin student's massive head tilted in confusion.
Professor, why would you choose such a primitive weapon when we have plasma rifles available?
Several reasons, Marcus replied, continuing to shape the bow's frame.
First, it requires no external power source. Second, it's silent in operation.
Third, it can be manufactured from readily available materials.
Fourth, its projectiles can be created from almost anything. And fifth, it's completely immune to electromagnetic warfare. That last point caught Commander Throck's attention. Immune to EMP attacks? Completely. Electronic weapons can be disabled by electromagnetic pulses, ion storms, or simple power failure. A bow will function in any environment where its user can draw the string.
Marcus began attaching the synthetic cables to create the bowstring. The process required careful calibration to achieve proper tension, but the materials were well suited to the task. The key to an effective bow is finding the right balance between draw weight and user capability. Too light, and your projectiles lack penetrating power. Too heavy, and the weapon becomes difficult to aim accurately. As he worked, Marcus noticed his students were taking detailed notes and asking questions about the construction process. Even the facility staff had gathered to watch. Professor Chen, the Altarian student asked, "What about projectiles?"
A weapon is only as effective as its ammunition.
Marcus grinned.
Excellent question.
In a survival situation, projectiles can be created from almost any straight, reasonably rigid material. He gathered several items from around the training facility. Structural supports from equipment housings, thin metal rods from various devices, even writing styluses from the administrative areas. The ideal projectile is straight, properly weighted, and has fletching to maintain stable flight. But, in an emergency, almost any pointed object can serve. He selected one of the metal rods and began modifying it, using tools from the maintenance station to create a sharp point at one end and adding small polymer fins at the other for flight stability. The fletching, these fins, creates drag at the back of the projectile, which keeps the pointed end forward during flight. It's the same principle used by modern guided missiles, just implemented mechanically instead of electronically. Commander Throck examined the arrow Marcus was creating. The penetrating power of such a primitive projectile would be limited against modern armor. True, if you're targeting the armor directly. But effective warfare isn't always about brute force penetration. Marcus pointed to various parts of a training android that was set up in the facility. Modern combat suits have joints, sensors, and interface ports that represent vulnerable points. A precisely placed arrow could disable mobility, damage sensors, or disrupt power distribution. The Zephyrian student, now visible as her excitement overcame her natural camouflage reflex, raised her hand. "Professor, you're describing precision targeting. How accurate can such a weapon be?" "That depends on the skill of the user and the quality of construction. But human archers have achieved remarkable accuracy throughout history. At the Battle of Agincourt, English longbowmen consistently hit targets at ranges exceeding 200 meters. Marcus completed the basic bow assembly and tested the string tension. The weapon was crude by modern standards, but functionally sound. He had created an effective projectile weapon from maintenance materials in less than an hour. "Now comes the real test," he announced. "Let's see how it performs." Commander Throck activated one of the training scenarios, creating a series of holographic targets at various ranges. The targets included both stationary and moving options, with different sizes and defensive characteristics. Marcus knocked the arrow he had constructed, drew the bowstring back, and took aim at the nearest target. The facility fell silent as everyone watched. The arrow flew true, striking the holographic target in its center mass. The training system registered a successful hit and calculated the impact energy. "Impressive accuracy," Commander Throck admitted. "But the kinetic energy is minimal compared to a plasma bolt or railgun projectile." "True, but watch this." Marcus selected a different arrow, one he had modified with a sharp, hardened point. He aimed at one of the training androids, specifically targeting a joint in its leg assembly. The arrow struck precisely where he intended, wedging into the joint mechanism. The android's movement immediately became erratic as its mobility system tried to compensate for the damaged joint. "A plasma rifle would have destroyed the entire android," Marcus explained. "But sometimes you don't want to destroy your target. Sometimes you want to disable, capture, or simply cause confusion." He demonstrated several more shots, each one targeting specific vulnerable points on different training devices. One arrow disabled a sensor array by covering its input port. Another triggered an emergency shutdown by activating a safety switch. A third created a short circuit by connecting two exposed power conduits. "This is precision warfare," Marcus said as his students watched in amazement. "Using minimal force to achieve maximum effect." The synth student's analysis patterns were cycling rapidly across his facial display. "Professor, the tactical applications are significant. A silent weapon that leaves no energy signature, requires no power source, and can be manufactured from available materials. And notice something else," Marcus added. "I've been using this weapon for less than an hour, with minimal practice. Imagine the effectiveness after proper training." Commander Throck was examining the bow with professional interest. "The construction principles are sound, but surely the time required to manufacture such a weapon would limit its practical application? How long does it take to replace a damaged plasma rifle?" Marcus asked in return. "To repair a broken targeting system? To recharge depleted energy cells?" He gestured to the bow. "This weapon was created from maintenance materials in less than 60 minutes. The projectiles can be manufactured in minutes from almost any available material. And, if damaged, individual components can be replaced or repaired without specialized tools." The implications were beginning to sink in among both students and faculty. Modern weapons were incredibly powerful, but they were also complex, resource-intensive, and vulnerable to various forms of disruption. "Let me demonstrate one more principle," Marcus said. He selected several different projectiles he had prepared, some with pointed tips for penetration, others with blunt heads for impact, and one with a small polymer payload that could carry various substances. Versatility is another advantage of primitive projectile systems. The same basic weapon can deliver different types of payloads for different tactical requirements. He shot the blunt-headed arrow at a control panel, demonstrating how it could activate switches without damaging sensitive equipment. The pointed arrow penetrated deep into a polymer target, showing its effectiveness against soft targets.
The payload arrow could theoretically deliver everything from marking compounds to chemical agents.
In a modern context, Marcus explained, these could carry tracking devices, communication scramblers, or even small explosive charges.
The Cronin student was now showing obvious excitement. Professor, the stealth applications are remarkable.
No energy signature to detect, no heat bloom, completely silent operation.
And that brings up another important point, Marcus said. This weapon represents a completely different tactical philosophy.
Modern warfare often relies on overwhelming firepower and technological superiority. But sometimes the most effective approach is subtlety. He began packing up the demonstration materials, but left the bow assembled so students could examine it more closely.
Your assignment for next time is this: I want each of you to research traditional weapons from your own species' history. Not just how they worked, but why they were effective. What problems did they solve? What tactical advantages did they provide that might still be relevant today?
The Altarian student approached the bow cautiously, examining its construction with obvious fascination.
Professor, may I ask a personal question? Where did you learn these techniques? Marcus smiled. Human children often learn archery as a recreational activity.
I spent summers at camps where traditional skills were taught alongside modern education. Many humans maintain these old skills as hobbies, not realizing they might have practical applications. Your species preserves ancient military techniques as entertainment, the Thraxian student asked, his four eyes focusing intently on Marcus.
We preserve a lot of old knowledge that other species might consider obsolete.
Sometimes what looks primitive from one perspective reveals itself as elegantly simple from another. Commander Throck had been unusually quiet during the latter part of the demonstration, but now he spoke up.
Professor Chen, I have to admit I'm impressed. The tactical applications of what you've shown could be significant in certain scenarios. Commander, would you be willing to participate in a more comprehensive demonstration?
I'd like to set up a scenario where my students face opponents using modern weapons while they rely on improvised tools and primitive techniques.
The big Ursines expression showed interest mixed with concern. That could be dangerous, Professor. Modern weapons have tremendous destructive power. We'll use simulation systems and non-lethal settings, Marcus assured him.
But I want my students to experience the stress of real tactical decision-making.
Very well.
I'll arrange for some of our advanced students to serve as opposing forces.
When did you want to conduct this exercise? Marcus grinned. How about tomorrow?
I think my students are ready for a real challenge. As the class ended and students began filing out, Marcus overheard fragments of excited conversations in various alien languages. The translation systems picked up discussions about traditional weapons, improvised tactics, and creative problem-solving approaches.
The Zephyrian student lingered after the others had left. Professor, I've been thinking about what you said regarding stealth applications.
My species has always relied heavily on technological camouflage, but our ancestors used natural concealment techniques that didn't require any power sources.
That's exactly the kind of thinking I want to encourage, Marcus replied.
Technology enhances our capabilities, but understanding the underlying principles gives us options when technology isn't available or appropriate.
I've been reading about human military history, she continued.
Some of your species' most successful military operations combined advanced technology with primitive techniques. The Academy's strategic planning chamber was a marvel of technology, with holographic displays that could simulate entire star systems and tactical scenarios involving thousands of ships. Dean Veltar stood before the main display, watching a recorded analysis of the previous day's training exercise with obvious fascination. Marcus Chen entered the chamber to find not only the Dean, but also Admiral Korthak, the Galactic Confederation's chief military strategist, and Dr. Yen Sis, the Academy's head of tactical research. The presence of such high-ranking officials suggested his teaching methods had attracted attention beyond the classroom. Professor Chen, Admiral Korthak rumbled, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded fleets in actual combat. The Admiral was a Bruton, a species known for their strategic thinking and natural resistance to psychological warfare. Your demonstration yesterday has created quite a stir among the military leadership. I hope that's a good thing, Admiral, Marcus replied, uncertain about the implications of such high-level attention. Dr. Yensis, a delicate crystalline being whose thoughts manifested as shifting light patterns within her translucent form, spoke next. Professor, our analysis of the exercise data reveals tactical paradigms we haven't encountered before. The efficiency ratios achieved by your students are unprecedented. Dean Veltar activated the holographic display, showing a three-dimensional analysis of the previous day's combat simulation. Color-coded tracks showed the movement patterns of all participants, energy expenditure readings, and tactical effectiveness ratings. The traditional approach, she explained, highlighting the defending forces' activities, shows high energy consumption, predictable movement patterns, and standard tactical responses. But, look at this. The display shifted to show the attacking team's activities. Their movement patterns were organic, almost random-looking, with minimal energy signatures and completely unpredictable tactical choices. Your students achieved mission success using less than 15% of the energy expenditure of the defending force, Admiral Korthak noted. They also demonstrated tactical unpredictability that our best strategic computers couldn't analyze effectively. Marcus studied the data with interest. The human military concept of force multiplication in action. When you can't match your opponent's resources, you multiply your effectiveness through superior tactics and creativity. Dr. Yensis's light pattern shifted to indicate intense analytical focus. Professor, we need to understand if these techniques can be integrated with modern military doctrine. Could conventional forces enhance their capabilities by adopting these approaches? That's exactly what I plan to explore in today's lesson, Marcus replied. My students are ready to learn combined tactics, using traditional techniques to enhance modern capabilities. We'd like permission to observe, Admiral Korthak said. The implications for military training could be significant. Marcus nodded. You're welcome to observe, but, I should warn you, today's exercise might challenge some fundamental assumptions about modern warfare. An hour later, the training facility had been reconfigured for the most complex scenario Marcus had yet attempted. His 40 students gathered around him, their various forms creating a rainbow of alien physiology and cultural backgrounds. Behind them, the Academy's senior faculty and military leadership watched with obvious anticipation. Today, we explore the concept of tactical synthesis, Marcus began. Instead of choosing between traditional and modern approaches, we're going to combine them to create something more powerful than either approach alone. He activated the facility's holographic systems, creating a complex battlefield scenario. A space station was under attack by superior forces, with defending troops trapped in multiple locations throughout the facility. Your mission is to coordinate a defense using both modern weapons and improvised tactics. You'll have access to standard military equipment, but you'll also need to create and deploy traditional weapons and techniques. The Cronin student raised his massive hand. Professor, how do we integrate such different approaches? They seem contradictory. Excellent question. Let me show you. Marcus walked over to a display case containing a standard plasma rifle. With Commander Throck's permission, he removed the weapon and examined it carefully. This is an incredibly effective weapon, he said, holding up the plasma rifle. High energy output, excellent range, sophisticated targeting systems. But, what are its limitations? The synth student's facial display flickered with analysis patterns. Power consumption, electromagnetic signature, complex maintenance requirements, and vulnerability to electronic countermeasures. Exactly. Now, what if we combine this weapon's capabilities with traditional techniques? Marcus retrieved the bow he had constructed earlier, setting it beside the plasma rifle. The bow is silent, requires no power, produces no electromagnetic signature, and can be manufactured from available materials. But its range and power are limited compared to the plasma rifle. He picked up both weapons, demonstrating how they could complement each other. Used together, these weapons cover each other's weaknesses. The plasma rifle for long-range, high-power engagements. The bow for stealth operations, close-quarters combat, and situations where electronic warfare might disable advanced weapons. The Zephyrian student, partially visible as she concentrated, asked, Professor, how would this work in practice? Switching between weapons would be inefficient. Not switching, coordinating. Different team members using different tools for different tactical roles. Marcus divided his students into integrated teams, each containing members with various specializations. Some would use modern weapons and equipment, others would rely on improvised tools and traditional techniques, and all would coordinate their activities to achieve common objectives. The key is communication and mutual support, he explained. Modern forces provide heavy firepower and electronic capabilities. Traditional forces provide stealth, flexibility, and backup systems. Together, they create redundancy and tactical options that neither could achieve alone. Admiral Korthak leaned forward with interest. Professor, this resembles ancient human military concepts. Combined arms tactics, if I recall correctly. Very good, Admiral. The principle of using different types of units to support each other's strengths and cover each other's weaknesses. Infantry, cavalry, and artillery in historical contexts. But, the same concept applies to combining traditional and modern approaches. Marcus activated the training scenario, and his students immediately began implementing their integrated strategies. The results were remarkable. Teams using only modern weapons struggled with power management and electronic countermeasures built into the scenario. Teams using only traditional techniques lacked the firepower to deal with heavily defended positions. But, the integrated teams found creative solutions that neither approach could achieve alone. The Altarian students' team used energy shields to protect archers who could engage targets that electronic sensors couldn't effectively track. The arrows' lack of electromagnetic signature made them invisible to the defending forces' automated defensive systems. The Thraxian team used their four-armed physiology to simultaneously operate modern weapons and traditional tools, creating devastating combined attacks that overwhelmed defenders designed to counter single-type threats. The Cronin team used heavy modern weapons to breach defensive positions, then switched to silent traditional weapons for close-quarters combat, maintaining tactical surprise throughout the engagement. Most impressively, the Zephyrian team used technological camouflage to approach target areas undetected, then deployed simple mechanical traps and traditional weapons that left no electronic signatures to betray their presence. Dr. Yensis was recording everything, her crystalline form pulsing with excitement as she analyzed the tactical data streaming from the exercise. The efficiency improvements are extraordinary. Energy consumption is down 40% compared to conventional tactics, but mission effectiveness is up 60%. Commander Throck was studying the coordination patterns with professional fascination. Professor Chen, the communication protocols your students are using, they're mixing electronic systems with traditional signals. How did they develop this so quickly? Marcus smiled. Adaptability is a natural response when you understand fundamental principles. They're not following a predetermined doctrine, they're creating solutions in real time based on the situation. The exercise continued for 2 hours, with scenarios of increasing complexity. Each challenge revealed new ways that traditional and modern approaches could enhance each other. When electronic warfare disabled the modern team's communication systems, they seamlessly switched to hand signals and predetermined movement patterns learned from traditional military techniques. When advanced sensors detected technological camouflage, teams used natural concealment methods that didn't rely on electronic systems. When energy weapons were neutralized by electromagnetic pulses, teams had backup mechanical weapons that continued functioning. The redundancy is the key, Marcus explained to the observing officials. Modern military forces are incredibly capable, but they can be vulnerable to specific countermeasures. Traditional techniques provide backup systems that use completely different principles. Admiral Korthak was taking detailed notes on a military datapad. Professor, the implications for special operations are significant. Forces that could operate with or without technological support would be invaluable. As the exercise concluded, Marcus gathered his students for debriefing. Their excitement was obvious as they described their experiences combining different tactical approaches. Professor, the synth student said, the integration created capabilities neither approach possessed individually. We achieved tactical flexibility I didn't know was possible. The Cronin student was examining a combination weapon one team had improvised, a traditional spear with a small energy cell attached to create an electrified tip. The engineering principles are fascinating. Traditional mechanical design enhanced by modern power systems. That's exactly the kind of thinking I want to encourage, Marcus replied. Innovation comes from combining existing concepts in new ways, not just developing entirely new technologies. Dr. Yensis approached with her analysis complete.
Professor Chen, the data from today's exercise suggests these combined tactics could revolutionize military training doctrine. Would you be willing to present your findings to the Confederation Military Council? Marcus considered the request carefully. He had come to the academy to teach history and basic tactical principles, but his methods seemed to be evolving into something much larger.
I'd be honored, Doctor. But I think the real credit belongs to my students. They're the ones who prove these concepts work in practice.
Dean Veltar joined the conversation. Professor, we'd like to expand your program.
The response from students and faculty has been overwhelming. Several other academy campuses have requested similar curriculum development. I'm willing to help, Marcus replied, but I want to make sure we maintain the core principles. This isn't about teaching specific techniques, it's about developing creative thinking and adaptive problem-solving abilities.
Admiral Korthak was reviewing tactical footage on his datapad with obvious interest. Professor, in actual combat scenarios, how quickly could personnel be trained in these combined tactics?
That depends on their existing skill levels and cultural backgrounds. But the basic principles can be taught relatively quickly.
Advanced application requires practice and experience. How quickly, the Admiral pressed.
Marcus thought about his own students' progress.
Basic competency in integrated tactics?
Perhaps 4 to 6 weeks of intensive training.
Advanced proficiency would take months or years, depending on the complexity of scenarios they needed to handle.
Acceptable timelines for special operations training, the Admiral mused.
Professor, would you be willing to develop a compressed curriculum for active military personnel?
The request represented a significant opportunity, but also a responsibility Marcus hadn't anticipated. His teaching methods were proving to have implications far beyond academic education.
Admiral, I'd need to understand the specific requirements and operational parameters. Military training is different from academic instruction.
Of course. I'll arrange for you to meet with our special operations commanders.
They can provide detailed specifications for training requirements.
As the official observers departed, Marcus found himself alone with his students. The excitement and energy in the room was palpable as they discussed their experiences and planned improvements for future exercises.
Professor, the Zephyrian student said, today's exercise felt different from anything we've done before.
It wasn't just about learning techniques, it was about learning to think differently. That's the real goal, Marcus replied.
Specific techniques are useful, but adaptive thinking is invaluable.
When you can approach problems from multiple perspectives, you become much more effective. The Altarian student was examining data from routine's performance. Professor, our efficiency ratings improved dramatically when we stopped thinking about traditional and modern as separate categories and started thinking about them as different tools in the same toolkit.
Exactly.
The distinction between old and new is often artificial. What matters is effectiveness and appropriateness for the specific situation. As the students prepared to leave, Marcus reflected on the day's success. His unconventional approach to military education was evolving into something he hadn't expected, a new paradigm for tactical thinking that could influence military doctrine throughout the Confederation. But he was also aware of the risks involved. Military applications of his teaching methods could have far-reaching consequences, both positive and potentially problematic. That evening, Marcus met with Dean Veltar to discuss the implications of the day's events.
Professor, I have to ask, when you accepted this position, did you anticipate that your methods would attract this level of attention?
Marcus smiled ruefully. Honestly, Dean, I thought I was going to be teaching historical warfare concepts to academically inclined students.
I never imagined developing new tactical doctrines. The question is, where do we go from here?
You've demonstrated that integrated tactics can be highly effective, but implementing them on a larger scale presents challenges.
What kind of challenges? Cultural resistance, for one.
Many species have strong traditions regarding their preferred military approaches. Asking them to adopt primitive techniques alongside their advanced technology could be controversial.
Marcus nodded.
That's why the teaching approach is so important.
It's not about abandoning advanced technology or adopting primitive techniques.
It's about expanding tactical options and developing adaptive thinking.
There's also the question of security.
If these methods prove as effective as today's demonstration suggests, we need to consider who has access to the training. That was a sobering consideration. Marcus's teaching methods could enhance the capabilities of any military force that implemented them, including potential enemies of the Confederation.
Dean, maybe we should focus on the educational aspects rather than the military applications.
The real value of what we're doing is teaching students to think creatively and adapt to unexpected situations.
I agree, Professor.
But I suspect that distinction may become difficult to maintain as word of your method spreads. Marcus spent the next few hours planning his remaining classes, but his mind kept returning to the broader implications of his work. He had intended to teach military history and basic tactical principles, but he seemed to be developing something much more significant. The integration of traditional and modern techniques wasn't just about weapons or tactics.
It represented a fundamental approach to problem solving that could apply to many fields beyond military applications.
His students were learning to see beyond the obvious function of tools and techniques, to understand underlying principles, and to create novel solutions by combining existing concepts in new ways. These were valuable skills regardless of their specific applications. As he prepared for sleep, Marcus decided to focus on the educational mission that had brought him to the academy. Military applications might follow naturally from effective education, but his primary responsibility was to his students and their intellectual development. Tomorrow, he would continue exploring the integration of traditional and modern approaches, but with emphasis on the thinking processes rather than the tactical outcomes. If his students learned to approach problems with creativity and adaptability, they would find their own applications for these skills.
The real lesson wasn't about weapons or tactics, it was about the power of human adaptability and creative thinking, qualities that could benefit any species willing to learn them. 3 weeks had passed since Marcus's demonstration of combined tactics, and the academy had settled into a new rhythm. Word of his teaching methods had spread throughout the institution, creating unexpected changes in how other courses were being taught. Students were asking different questions, approaching problems from multiple angles, and demonstrating creativity that surprised even experienced faculty. Marcus was reviewing lesson plans in his office when his door chimed. "Come in," he called, expecting one of his students with questions about their current project. Instead, Dean Veltar entered, accompanied by Admiral Korthak and a person Marcus didn't recognize, a tall, pale humanoid with silver eyes and wearing the dark blue uniform of Confederation intelligence. "Professor Chen," the dean said, her expression unusually serious, "this is Director Salix from Confederation intelligence. We have an urgent situation."
Marcus stood, immediately sensing the gravity of whatever had brought these officials to his office.
"How can I help?"
Director Salix stepped forward, her silver eyes studying Marcus with obvious intensity. "Professor, 12 hours ago, we lost contact with Research Station Kepler-7. The station was conducting classified weapons research in a system near the disputed border with the hegemony." Admiral Korthak activated a portable holographic display, showing a detailed schematic of a space station orbiting a remote planet.
Kepler-7 housed 43 researchers and a security contingent of 20 personnel.
They were developing countermeasures against hegemony stealth technology. "I'm sorry to hear about the situation," Marcus said carefully, "but I'm not sure how I can help.
I'm a teacher, not a military operative."
Director Salix exchanged glances with the Admiral before continuing. 6 hours ago, we received a brief transmission from the station. The facility has been infiltrated by unknown forces using tactics our people have never encountered before." She activated another display, showing recorded sensor data from the station. The readings were confusing, movement signatures that appeared and disappeared randomly, equipment malfunctions that seemed to follow no pattern, and communication disruptions that defied technical explanation. "Our analysts can't make sense of the tactical approaches being used," Admiral Korthak explained.
"The infiltrators seem to be using methods that don't match any known military doctrine." Marcus studied the data with growing concern. "Admiral, why are you showing me this?"
"Because," Director Salix said quietly, "the few tactical details we've been able to analyze match techniques similar to what you've been teaching here at the academy." The implication hit Marcus like a physical blow.
"You think someone has been using my teaching methods against Confederation forces?"
"We think someone has developed similar approaches independently," Dean Veltar said quickly. "Or possibly learned about your methods through other channels." Director Salix pulled up additional data. "The infiltrators are using silent weapons, improvised equipment, and coordination patterns that don't rely on electronic communication. They've disabled advanced security systems using simple mechanical interference.
It's exactly the kind of integrated traditional modern approach you demonstrated.
Marcus sank into his chair, the weight of responsibility settling heavily on his shoulders. You're saying my teaching methods might have been used to harm Confederation personnel? We're saying, Admiral Korthak replied, that we need someone who understands these tactics to help us develop a response. The rescue operation is being planned now, but our forces don't know how to counter these approaches. Professor, Director Salix added, we're not asking you to participate in combat operations. But we need your expertise to brief the rescue teams on what they might face and how to counter it. Marcus looked at the three officials, understanding that his academic life was about to take a dramatic turn.
What exactly are you asking me to do?
Come with us to the command center, Admiral Korthak said. Help us understand what's happening at Kepler 7 and develop strategies to counter it. 2 hours later, Marcus found himself in the Academy's Crisis Command Center, a facility he hadn't known existed. The room was filled with holographic displays showing real-time intelligence data, communication arrays connecting to Confederation forces throughout the sector, and senior military personnel coordinating response operations. The rescue force was already assembled, 2 stealth frigates carrying special operations teams equipped with the most advanced weapons and equipment available. But, as Marcus reviewed their tactical plans, he realized they were preparing for conventional combat against conventional opponents. Admiral, Marcus said, studying the mission briefings, your teams are planning to use standard infiltration techniques and advanced weapons.
If the enemy is using integrated traditional modern tactics, these approaches might be ineffective. Admiral Korthak gestured to the display showing Kepler 7's current status. What do you recommend, Professor?
Marcus examined the station's layout and the available intelligence. First, your teams need to understand that they're not facing conventional opponents. The enemy is probably using methods specifically designed to counter advanced technology. He highlighted several areas on the station schematic.
These are the locations where your sensors detected anomalous activity.
Notice the pattern, they're avoiding areas with heavy electronic surveillance and focusing on sections where mechanical access is possible. Director Salix leaned forward with interest. Meaning they're using ventilation shafts, maintenance corridors, and service areas rather than main passages.
Exactly. And they're probably using simple tools and weapons that don't create electronic signatures.
Your sensors are designed to detect energy weapons and powered equipment.
They might not recognize traditional tools as threats.
Marcus spent the next hour briefing the special operations commanders via secure communication link. He explained the principles behind integrated tactics, the weaknesses of conventional security systems against unconventional approaches, and strategies for countering creative opponents. The key, he told the team leaders, is to expect the unexpected.
Don't rely solely on your sensors and electronic systems. Use traditional observation methods, sight, sound, even smell. Look for signs of disturbance that technology might miss.
One of the commanders, a grizzled Ursine veteran named Colonel Thane, asked the question Marcus had been dreading.
Professor, if these tactics are so effective, why hasn't the Confederation been using them?
Because we've become dependent on technological solutions, Marcus replied honestly. Advanced weapons and sensors are incredibly powerful, but they can become liabilities when facing opponents who understand their limitations.
The rescue operation launched 4 hours later.
Marcus remained in the command center, monitoring communications and providing tactical advice as the situation developed. What he heard confirmed his worst fears. The special operations teams encountered opposition unlike anything in their training. Defenders who seemed to appear and disappear without using technological camouflage.
Weapons that disabled electronic equipment without creating energy signatures.
Coordinated attacks that couldn't be predicted by tactical analysis computers. They're using everything we discussed in class, Marcus muttered, listening to confused reports from the field teams.
Professor, Admiral Korthak said, can you provide specific countermeasures? Marcus thought rapidly.
Tell your teams to work in smaller groups, use redundant communication methods including hand signals, and create their own improvised equipment. They need to fight creativity with creativity.
Over the next several hours, the rescue operation evolved into something unprecedented.
Confederation forces found themselves adapting their tactics in real time, abandoning conventional approaches and developing creative solutions to unexpected problems. The breakthrough came when Colonel Thane's team stopped relying on their advanced sensors and started using traditional tracking methods. They noticed disturbances in dust patterns, displaced objects, and other physical signs that their electronic systems had missed. "We've been looking for electronic signatures," Colonel Thane reported, "but these people are leaving physical traces everywhere.
They're just not the kind of traces our equipment is designed to detect."
Gradually, the Confederation forces began to gain the upper hand. By adapting their tactics and combining advanced technology with traditional observation methods, they were able to counter the infiltrators' approaches. The operation culminated in a complex engagement where both sides used integrated traditional modern tactics, creating a battle unlike anything in recorded military history. Advanced energy weapons fired alongside improvised projectiles, electronic warfare systems operated beside mechanical traps, and high-tech sensors worked in coordination with traditional observation methods. When the station was finally secured, 38 of the 43 researchers were found alive, along with 15 of the 20 security personnel. The infiltrators had been neutralized or captured, and their equipment and methods were available for analysis. But, as Marcus reviewed the after-action reports, he realized the implications went far beyond a single rescue operation. The enemy forces had indeed been using tactics remarkably similar to what he had been teaching, but with refinements and applications he hadn't considered.
"Professor," Director Salix said as they reviewed captured equipment, "these infiltrators weren't from the hegemony.
They were from a previously unknown group that seems to have developed these tactics independently. The captured weapons and tools were ingenious combinations of traditional and modern elements.
Crossbows with energy-charged projectiles. Mechanical traps enhanced by electronic sensors.
Communication systems that used both technological and traditional signaling methods. They've taken the integrated approach even further than we have," Marcus observed. "This isn't just combining old and new, it's creating entirely new categories of equipment and tactics."
Admiral Korthak was studying intelligence reports with obvious concern. If one group has developed these capabilities independently, others probably have as well. The tactical landscape may be changing faster than we realized. The realization was sobering.
Marcus's teaching methods had emerged from human military history and creative thinking, but the underlying principles were logical enough that other species or organizations could develop them independently. The galaxy might be entering a new era of warfare based on adaptability and creative thinking rather than raw technological power. Professor Dean Veltar said, "This situation raises important questions about the Academy's role in developing these tactical concepts."
Marcus nodded grimly.
"We can't uninvent these ideas, but we need to think carefully about how they're developed and disseminated."
Director Salix was reviewing classified intelligence analyses.
"Professor, based on what happened today, Confederation Command is requesting that you develop defensive strategies against these integrated tactics. If other groups are using similar methods, our forces need to be prepared." The request represented a dramatic expansion of Marcus's role from teacher to strategic consultant, but he realized he had little choice. The principles he had been teaching were now active factors in actual conflicts, and the Confederation needed expertise to deal with them. "I'll help," Marcus said, "but I want to maintain the educational focus. The goal should be developing adaptive thinking abilities, not just specific countermeasures." "Agreed," Admiral Korthak replied. "We need personnel who can think creatively and adapt to unexpected situations, not just follow predetermined responses." As the immediate crisis concluded, Marcus found himself facing a new reality. His academic experiment in teaching traditional warfare concepts had evolved into something with real-world implications. The integration of old and new tactical approaches was becoming a significant factor in galactic military affairs. But he also realized that this development validated the fundamental principles he had been teaching. Creativity, adaptability, and the ability to see beyond obvious solutions were becoming essential skills in an increasingly complex universe. That evening, as Marcus returned to his quarters, he reflected on the day's events. His students had proven that human approaches to warfare could be taught to other species with remarkable effectiveness. But they had also demonstrated that these approaches could be developed independently by anyone willing to think creatively about tactical problems. The galaxy was changing, and the Academy's role in that change was becoming more significant than anyone had anticipated. Marcus's next challenge would be developing educational programs that could keep pace with rapidly evolving tactical realities while maintaining the ethical and intellectual standards appropriate for an academic institution. His teaching methods had proven their effectiveness in the most demanding possible test, actual combat operations against creative opponents. But, with that success came new responsibilities and challenges he was only beginning to understand. Tomorrow, he would need to begin developing new curriculum that could prepare students for a universe where technological superiority was no longer the determining factor in military effectiveness. The age of adaptive warfare had begun, and the Academy needed to lead the way in understanding its implications. 6 months had passed since the Kepler-7 incident, and the Galactic Academy bore little resemblance to the institution Marcus had first encountered. The pristine corridors still gleamed with advanced technology, but now they also hosted students practicing with improvised weapons, studying ancient battle tactics alongside modern warfare theory, and developing creative solutions to tactical problems that didn't exist in any textbook. Marcus stood in what had once been a traditional lecture hall, watching his expanded class of 120 students work through complex scenarios that combined every principle he had taught them. The original 40 students had become teaching assistants, helping newer students understand the integration of traditional and modern approaches. The class roster now included not just academy students, but active military personnel, intelligence operatives, and civilian researchers from dozens of worlds. Word of the Academy's revolutionary tactical education program had spread throughout Confederation space, creating demand that far exceeded the institution's capacity. Professor Chen, the Cronin student, now a senior teaching assistant, called out from across the training area, Team 7 has successfully completed the resource limitation scenario using only maintenance materials and basic chemistry supplies. Marcus walked over to examine their solution. Team 7 had been tasked with neutralizing a heavily defended position using materials available in a typical civilian facility. Their approach combined chemical reactions to create smokescreens, mechanical engineering to construct siege equipment, and psychological tactics to create confusion among defenders. Excellent work, Marcus said, examining their improvised crossbow that fired projectiles tipped with locally manufactured chemical compounds. You've solved the problem by understanding the principles behind each component rather than relying on predetermined solutions. The Zephyrian student, now barely visible as she demonstrated advanced camouflage techniques that combine technological and natural methods, materialized beside him. Professor, the integration possibilities seem limitless. Every time we think we've explored all the combinations, someone discovers new applications. That was both the promise and the challenge of what they were developing. The principles Marcus had introduced were generating innovations faster than anyone could catalog or control them. Dean Veltar approached with a datapad containing the latest reports from Confederation Command. Professor, Admiral Korthak sends his compliments. The Special Operations units trained in your methods have achieved mission success rates 30% higher than conventional forces. That's gratifying, Marcus replied, though he was increasingly concerned about the military applications of his work. What about the civilian applications? Are we maintaining balance between military and non-military education? Better than expected. Engineering students are using your problem-solving approaches to develop more efficient manufacturing processes. Medical students are combining traditional healing methods with modern medicine. Even art students are finding applications. The expansion beyond military applications had been one of Marcus's requirements for continuing the program. The creative thinking and adaptability principles he taught had value far beyond warfare, and he insisted that the Academy maintain that broader perspective. Professor, the Altarian student called from another part of the training area, the diplomatic team requests consultation on their negotiation scenario. Marcus walked over to find a mixed group of students working through a complex diplomatic simulation. They were applying tactical principles to international relations, using misdirection, resource management, and adaptive strategies to achieve political objectives. Interesting approach, Marcus observed. How are you applying military concepts to diplomacy? The synth student's facial display showed animated analysis patterns. Professor, we realized that negotiation is fundamentally similar to tactical engagement. Multiple parties with competing objectives, limited resources, incomplete information, and the need for adaptive strategies. They're using traditional diplomatic methods enhanced by tactical analysis, the Altarian student added. Ancient human techniques like reading body language and understanding cultural context, combined with modern information processing and strategic planning. Marcus nodded approvingly. This was exactly the kind of cross-disciplinary thinking he hoped to encourage. The principles of adaptation and creative problem-solving applied to virtually any field that involved complex challenges and uncertain outcomes. Professor Chen, a new voice interrupted. Marcus turned to see Commander Throck approaching with a worried expression.
We have a situation in Training Bay 7. One of the advanced teams has created something unexpected.
They walked quickly to the designated training area, where Marcus found a group of students gathered around what appeared to be a standard maintenance robot. But, as he examined it more closely, he realized they had modified it extensively.
What exactly have you done? Marcus asked the team leader, a Thraxian student whose forearms had proven particularly useful for complex modifications.
Professor, we were exploring the integration of mechanical and electronic systems for autonomous tactical support, the student explained excitedly. We've created a robot that can manufacture improvised weapons and deploy traditional tactics without requiring constant human direction. Marcus examined their creation with growing concern. The robot had been equipped with mechanical fabrication tools, sensor arrays configured to recognize improvisational materials, and programming that could analyze tactical situations and create appropriate responses. It can build crossbows, spears, simple explosives, and mechanical traps using available materials, another team member added proudly. The artificial intelligence applies the same creative principles you've been teaching us.
The implications were staggering.
Marcus had been teaching creative thinking and adaptability to sentient students, but this team had programmed those same abilities into an artificial system. Professor, Commander Throck said quietly, this could change the nature of warfare entirely. Autonomous systems that can adapt and innovate in real time. Marcus studied the robot's modifications, realizing his students had created something that went far beyond his original intentions. They had taken human creativity and ingenuity and made them reproducible on an industrial scale. Team, he said carefully, this is remarkable work, but we need to consider the implications before proceeding further.
What kind of implications? The Thraxian student asked. Think about what happens when these capabilities are widely available.
If anyone can deploy autonomous systems that create weapons and tactics in real time, how does that change the balance of power? The team exchanged glances as the broader consequences of their innovation became apparent. They had created a system that could democratize advanced military capabilities, potentially eliminating the advantages that technological superiority provided.
Professor, the team's synth member said, we hadn't considered the strategic implications.
We were focused on the technical challenge. This was exactly the kind of situation Marcus had been worried about. The principles he taught were so fundamental and powerful that they generated innovations faster than their consequences could be evaluated.
Let's shut down the demonstration for now, Marcus said. We need to think through the implications before continuing development.
As the students reluctantly deactivated their creation, Marcus reflected on how rapidly his simple teaching methods had evolved into something with profound implications for galactic civilization. Later that day, Marcus met with Dean Veltar, Admiral Korthak, and Director Salix to discuss the situation.
The conference room's holographic displays showed reports from across Confederation space, detailing the expanding influence of Academy-trained personnel and the tactical innovations they were developing.
Professor, Admiral Korthak began, the autonomous weapons system your students created represents a significant development. Our analysts believe it could revolutionize military logistics and tactical deployment.
It could also destabilize existing power structures, Director Salix added.
If these systems become widely available, traditional military advantages based on technological superiority could become irrelevant. Dean Veltar displayed statistical analyses of Academy graduates' performance in various fields. Professor, the broader implications go beyond military applications.
Academy-trained personnel are outperforming their peers in engineering, medicine, diplomacy, and research.
We're seeing fundamental improvements in problem-solving effectiveness across multiple disciplines. Marcus studied the data with mixed feelings. His teaching methods were clearly effective, but their rapid spread was creating changes he hadn't anticipated.
What are you all asking me to do? He said finally.
We need guidelines, Admiral Korthak replied. Principles for determining which innovations should be developed and which should be restricted. We also need to understand the long-term consequences, Director Salix added. Your methods are spreading beyond Academy graduates to their colleagues and associates.
The influence is exponential.
Marcus considered the request carefully. He had started with the simple goal of teaching military history and basic tactical principles.
Now he was being asked to help shape the development of capabilities that could influence galactic civilization.